Two sisters, two queens at first glance, the daughters of Henry VIII could not have been more different from one another. Their connection was fraught, characterized by separation and disparity. Mary Tudor was brought up in a life of strict devotion to the Catholic faith, with her world shaped by rituals, confession, and loyalty to Rome. Elizabeth Tudor, born many years later, grew up surrounded by the ideas of the new Protestant order, learning to question what her sister held sacred. To Mary, Elizabeth's beliefs seemed dangerously rebellious. To Elizabeth, Mary's devotion appeared old and heavy with the past. Between them lay not only a chasm of years, but also the burden of two conflicting worlds. England itself was divided, caught in a struggle between the old faith and the new. In an era when men held power by divine right, and women were seen as too delicate to lead, both sisters would challenge the norms of their time and ascend to the throne one after the other, each compelled to demonstrate that a woman could rule a kingdom designed for kings.
England was governed by men and constrained by the notion that women were led by emotion rather than reason. Society viewed them as delicate, unable to lead with strength or reason. In this patriarchal world, both Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor would rise to prove the opposite, each facing the burden of being a woman on the throne. One reign was brief, while the other was extended. Mary Tudor represented the Catholic faith and a connection to Spain, whereas Elizabeth Tudor forged her success through independence and resistance. Elizabeth Tudor observed her sister's missteps intently, crafting her own journey with thoughtful precision. Her vow to remain unmarried was a conscious choice for survival, a refusal to repeat the errors that had ensnared Mary Tudor. History painted Mary Tudor as Bloody Mary, and Elizabeth Tudor as the Virgin Queen. Yet, beneath the contrast, they shared the same legacy, daughters of Henry VIII, who redefined the power of queenship in England.
Mary Tudor was born at Greenwich on the 18th of February, 1516. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was the first wife of Henry VIII, a Spanish princess and aunt to the Holy Roman Emperor, raised in the deep Catholic tradition of Spain. Catherine came from a line of formidable women, and her mother, Isabella of Castile, was a warrior figure who educated Catherine and the family with fierce discipline. As a result, Catherine became one of the most educated and accomplished women.
Even though she was not the long-awaited son, Mary Tudor brought a sense of relief after years filled with heartbreak from miscarriages and stillbirths, serving as evidence to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon that having children was indeed possible. With Catherine of Aragon around 30 and Henry VIII younger, there was still hope for a future brother. As a child, Mary Tudor was fair and rosy, much like her father, and Henry VIII showered her with affection. Mary Tudor received the finest education that was expected for a royal daughter, although Henry VIII envisioned her primarily as a well-bred wife, while Catherine of Aragon was determined not to accept that limitation. Catherine of Aragon raised Mary Tudor to be Spanish-speaking and devoutly Catholic, surrounded by attendants and elite tutors who trained her to read, dance, and sing.
From an early age, Mary Tudor demonstrated remarkable talent, excelling in languages, music, and courtly manners well beyond her years. By the age of 15, she was sent to Ludlow as the acting Princess of Wales, governing the region on behalf of Henry VIII and receiving a formal education in Latin, Greek, and political strategy the essential tools of leadership she would later utilize.
The Queen restored belief
Mary
in
Tudor's
her equal
education
intellect
instilled in her the
and
belief that she was
a
on par
mind
with any
forged
man.
beyond
She
gender.
recognized in herself the keen mind of Henry VIII and the reflective faith of Catherine of Aragon. Yet her education was also intended to ready her for a royal marriage, the destiny anticipated for every princess. In the 16th century in Europe, daughters were often used as bargaining chips in diplomacy. Henry VIII repeatedly offered the hand of Mary Tudor to secure peace or strengthen alliances. She was engaged to several Valois and Habsburg princes, her value assessed through treaties rather than love. Even as a young girl, Mary Tudor was a piece in the grand chess match of European dominance.
In the time of Mary Tudor's youth, her surroundings started to change. By the year 1525, Catherine of Aragon had reached the age of 40, and the hope for the long-awaited male heir had begun to diminish. It became evident that Catherine of Aragon would never give Henry VIII the son he longed for, a reality that would soon alter the course of their lives. Henry VIII was driven by his desire for a son, a preoccupation that shaped his entire reign. Since his marriage in the year 1509, he had endured years of disappointment, watching his hopes for a male heir vanish with every miscarriage and stillbirth. As just the second Tudor king, Henry VIII bore the significant weight of safeguarding a delicate dynasty that emerged from civil war. Amidst rivals in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, he perceived each threat as a poignant reminder that the Tudor line could falter without a robust successor. For Henry VIII, the peace of England relied completely on having sons, not just one, but multiple, to ensure the succession and keep the kingdom from falling into chaos once more. That obsession transformed into a purpose that consumed him entirely. Nothing else held significance for Henry VIII. Each thought, each act of faith or cruelty started to revolve around that one desire: the arrival of a male heir to uphold the Tudor name. As Henry VIII's desire for a son grew stronger, his love for Catherine of Aragon began to fade. Henry VIII became infatuated with one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, a woman unlike any of his previous mistresses. Henry VIII fell in love with Anne Boleyn with a passion that eclipsed reason. He was certain she alone could give him the male heir he craved, and for that to happen, Catherine of Aragon had to be cast aside.
For 20 years, Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon had shared a stable and affectionate marriage. But when Catherine of Aragon could no longer bear children, Henry VIII became convinced that God had cursed their union. He turned to Scripture, interpreting a verse from Leviticus as divine proof that marrying his brother's widow had brought him misfortune. This belief became his reason to pursue an annulment, stating that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon had never genuinely existed. The Church stood firm. Catherine of Aragon remained resolute, refusing to acknowledge any fault, as the Pope wavered in his decision to provide the annulment that could provoke the ire of influential allies across Europe. The conflict dragged on for almost 10 years, and throughout it all, the young Mary Tudor found herself caught between her parents loyal to her mother, yet powerless against her father's will. In the year 1531, Henry VIII prohibited Mary Tudor from visiting Catherine of Aragon unless both complied with his request for annulment. It was an act of chilling cruelty from a father who once cherished his daughter, and it did not succeed in severing their connection. Catherine of Aragon stood her ground, and her unwavering spirit shattered Mary Tudor's heart. Mary Tudor's teenage years were already shadowed by fragile health and prolonged periods of sadness. But now she faced the most profound hurt of all. Henry VIII was attempting to take away her legitimacy, dismiss her mother, and erase both of them from the royal lineage. For Mary Tudor, nothing could have been more devastating, and the humiliation would shape the woman she would become.
For Catherine of Aragon and Mary Tudor, both devoted Spanish Catholics, the next move by Henry VIII was beyond imagination. In his desperation for a son, Henry VIII turned against the very church he had once defended. He broke from Rome, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and in January 1533, with the support of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, he obtained the annulment he had long sought. Shortly thereafter, Henry VIII wed Anne Boleyn, who was already anticipating the arrival of a child. During that summer, Anne Boleyn was crowned Queen of England in a grand display intended to affirm her rightful position alongside the king. On the 7th day of September in that same year, Anne Boleyn gave birth not to the longed-for son, but to a daughter, Elizabeth Tudor. Even with the disappointment, Elizabeth Tudor was beloved by her parents, as a testament to Anne Boleyn's ability to bear children and to Henry VIII's vigor.
The king desired a son to secure his dynasty.
For Mary Tudor, the arrival of Elizabeth Tudor signified not happiness, but shame. The 17-year-old Mary Tudor, once the treasured princess, was now declared illegitimate and pushed to the margins of court life. At the command of Henry VIII, Mary Tudor lost her titles, privileges, and symbols of rank. Her livery, her attendants, and the trappings of her birthright disappeared, leaving her a daughter forgotten by her own father. Mary Tudor was not just displaced, but also deprived of every title and dignity. Once a Princess of Wales, she was now compelled to serve as a maid of honor in the household of her infant sister. Elizabeth Tudor became the recognized princess, the cherished heir, surrounded by splendor and favor, while Mary Tudor lived under the shadow of humiliation, effectively reduced to her sister's attendant. The pressure on Mary Tudor was unyielding. She was compelled to recognize her own illegitimacy, to refer to Anne Boleyn as queen, and to accept Elizabeth Tudor as the legitimate heir. It was a bitter and miserable time for her, and even worse was still ahead. On the 7th day of January in the year 1536, Catherine of Aragon passed away at Kimbolton Castle. A multitude of her supporters murmured about poison, even though sickness had already taken its toll on her strength. Until her last breath, Catherine of Aragon steadfastly refused to acknowledge Henry VIII's new marriage or give up her claim as the rightful Queen of England. In a display of his harshness, Henry VIII prohibited Mary Tudor from attending her mother's funeral, robbing her of the opportunity to bid farewell.
The passing of Catherine of Aragon marked Mary Tudor as the final significant emblem of the old faith. For those loyal to Rome, Mary Tudor stood as a symbol of defiance against the king's new order. Henry VIII understood that compelling her to submit would extinguish the final whisper of rebellion. Yet, as the court marked the passing of Catherine of Aragon, showcasing the young Elizabeth Tudor to jubilant crowds, the joy within the royal household was short-lived. Within months, Anne Boleyn fell from grace, accused of adultery, incest, and treason, and on the 19th of May, in the year 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower of London. Anne Boleyn's inability to bear a son determined her destiny, much like it had led to the downfall of the queen who came before her. Henry VIII quickly became weary of Anne Boleyn. The charm and energy that had once enchanted him as a lover turned into unbearable qualities in a wife. After all the turmoil he had caused to make her queen, the broken marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the break from Rome, and the creation of the Church of England, his passion turned to frustration. Anne Boleyn faced accusations of infidelity with her musician, Mark Smeaton, as well as with several noblemen, one of whom was her own brother. Regardless of their truth, Henry VIII accepted the charges without any hesitation. All were sent to the Tower of London, and on the 19th of May in the year 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed. Even before Anne Boleyn's death, Henry VIII's attention had shifted to Jane Seymour, a quiet and obedient lady at court. Just a few days after the execution of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII took Jane Seymour as his third wife. During this time, Mary Tudor, mourning her mother's passing and apprehensive about her father's authority, ultimately gave in. In a bid to win back his favour, she recognized Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England and admitted to being an illegitimate child born of incest. The submission lingered in her mind for the remainder of her life.
Even after being forgiven and welcomed back to court, Mary Tudor's position continued to be uncertain. A recent act of succession positioned the unborn child of Jane Seymour above both Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor. In the autumn of 1537, Jane Seymour presented Henry VIII with the prize he had sought for decades, a son, Edward Tudor, the long-awaited male heir who would ensure the continuation of the Tudor line.
The long-awaited Prince Edward Tudor was born at Hampton Court Palace, the grand and ever-expanding heart of Henry VIII's court. Henry VIII was filled with joy. His quest had at last been accomplished. For him, the arrival of a son justified every choice he had made, regardless of how harsh it had been. Regarding Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, they seemed to fade into the background. They stayed at court, yet their father's interest in them completely diminished. Yet the birth of Edward Tudor, while setting the sisters aside, also granted them a sense of peace. Both had already been branded illegitimate in the eyes of the crown, and now they shared a brother who united them, however briefly, under one fragile sense of family. When Edward Tudor arrived, neither Mary Tudor nor Elizabeth Tudor was anticipated to take the throne, and for a while that freed them from competition and peril.
Elizabeth Tudor started to receive a solid education in her own home and eventually became part of her brother's studies, where her learning expanded further. Mary Tudor, now back at court by invitation, spent additional time in the company of Jane Seymour and gradually re-established her connection with her father. Her fortunes appeared to rise once more, if only for a brief moment.
Jane Seymour passed away soon after bringing a child into the world, and although Henry VIII would enter into 3 additional marriages, no more offspring followed. Throughout the remainder of his life, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor found themselves in a similar precarious situation, daughters lacking complete legitimacy, yet undeniably woven into the fabric of the royal family. When Henry VIII passed away on the 28th of January in the year 1547, a new act of succession, enacted a few years prior, had already altered the line of inheritance and prepared the ground for the tumultuous years that lay ahead. Although they were still officially deemed illegitimate, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor were both reinstated in the royal line of succession, but first in line was their young brother, Edward Tudor. Upon the death of Henry VIII, Edward Tudor took the throne as a young king, flanked by regents and protectors, influential figures who governed on his behalf and advanced England's journey towards Protestant reform. Yet Edward Tudor himself shared that passion. Despite his young age, he was committed to the Reformed faith and eager to witness his country transformed by it. Early portraits depict Edward Tudor as a healthy and confident young man, a strong rider, athletic and brimming with vitality. As the years passed, he started to take greater control over his government, demonstrating his intelligence and determination. Yet, his time in power presented difficulties for both sisters. Elizabeth Tudor, at that time a young teenager, resided in the household of Henry VIII's final wife, Catherine Parr. It was there that she encountered the unwelcome and distressing advances of Catherine Parr's new husband, Thomas Seymour, an experience that left a lasting impact on her youth.
Mary Tudor, in the meantime, engaged in intense conflict with her brother's Protestant court. She stood her ground, refusing to abandon the Catholic Mass or embrace the new English prayer books, defying royal orders and remaining steadfast in her faith. The conflict between Mary Tudor and Edward Tudor became increasingly intense and was laid bare for all to see. Edward Tudor, in his role as king, sought her obedience. Mary Tudor, with her pride and stubbornness, stood firm against taking orders from her younger brother. During a Christmas gathering, their disagreement about religion culminated in tears, both firmly believing the other was mistaken and neither willing to back down.
The reign of Edward Tudor was brief. In the early year of 1553, illness brought him low. On the 6th day of July that year, at just 15 years of age, Edward Tudor passed away. His death was kept secret by his council for a number of days as they prepared a plan to control what came next, a plan that would ignite one of the most dramatic succession crises in English history.
Nearly. This changes everything. We must move quickly.
Before his death, Edward Tudor was aware that Mary Tudor, his Catholic sister, was poised for her opportunity to take back the throne and undo his Protestant reforms. With a steadfast resolve to maintain England's Protestant faith, he composed a document in the month of April prior to his passing, referred to as the Device for the Succession. Unable to call Parliament due to illness, Edward Tudor circumvented the rightful succession and excluded both Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor from inheriting the throne. Instead, he chose his first cousin once removed, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor, a quiet, scholarly teenager who had recently married the son of his powerful advisor, the Duke of Northumberland. For Edward Tudor and his council, this represented a means to ensure a Protestant future for all time. When news of Edward Tudor's death finally spread, England was thrown into chaos. The young king had passed away, yet there was no consensus on who ought to take the throne next. Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed queen by the council, a move that many viewed as a coup rather than a true coronation. Meanwhile, from her estates in East Anglia, Mary Tudor would not accept defeat.
Just days before her brother's death, Mary Tudor received a summons to court, supposedly to visit him, completely unaware that schemes were being devised to confine her. Just in time, a loyal supporter warned her, prompting her to turn away and ride swiftly towards East Anglia, where her lands and allies were waiting. In that place, Mary Tudor started to gather an army, reaching out to her tenants and supporters throughout the area. For Mary Tudor, this was more than a struggle for power, it was a sacred mission. She held the conviction that God had safeguarded her throughout years of humiliation to reclaim both her birthright and the genuine faith of England. With determination, resolve, and an unyielding spirit, Mary Tudor stood poised to seize the crown she felt was destined for her by divine will.
On the 10th of July, 1553, Edward Tudor's council, led by the ambitious Duke of Northumberland, proclaimed Lady Jane Grey as Queen of England. With control over London, the Tower, and the Royal Armoury, the council seemed to possess complete authority. Northumberland started to assemble forces with the aim of seizing Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, convinced that any opposition would fall apart. But as soon as Northumberland departed from the capital, uncertainty started to circulate. The streets of London were quiet when Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen. There were no cheers, no festivities. Individuals viewed her not as a legitimate leader, but rather as a tool of influential men. In their hearts, the English longed for the true heir, the daughter of Henry VIII. The tide turned swiftly in the favor of Mary Tudor.
Throughout the nation, backing for Mary Tudor grew significantly. Towns and noble families pledged their loyalty to her, and within a few days, the strength of her army expanded beyond what the council could manage. Lady Jane Grey, filled with fear and a sense of isolation, sat in the Tower of London, waiting helplessly as her cause crumbled around her.
6 days after marching out of London, Northumberland himself was compelled to yield to the truth. He acknowledged Mary Tudor as the Queen of England. The attempted coup faded away without a single significant battle. Victorious, Mary Tudor advanced towards London to claim her crown, while Elizabeth Tudor, her younger sister, and now heir presumptive, faced the uncertain consequences of a new reign that could easily turn from affection to suspicion. With Lady Jane Grey defeated, Elizabeth Tudor found herself in a fragile situation. She was Mary Tudor's heir, yet also her greatest potential rival. In early August, Elizabeth Tudor encountered Mary Tudor just outside London, leading a group of 1,000 horsemen clad in the Tudor colours of green and white. It was a display intended to demonstrate loyalty to Mary Tudor, yet it also served as a subtle reminder of Elizabeth Tudor's own significance and power. The two sisters rode triumphantly into London, side by side. The city had undergone a remarkable transformation for the occasion. Streets were swept clean, buildings adorned with tapestries, and crowds gathered closely to catch a glimpse of their new queen. Mary Tudor looked magnificent in royal purple, her gown embellished with pearls and jewels that sparkled in the sunlight. Though shy by nature, she carried herself with the solemn dignity of a queen, determined to restore peace and unity. Riding behind her was Elizabeth Tudor, who was tall and striking, her composure serving as a perfect contrast to her sister's modest bearing.
The spectacle was more than a coronation procession. It was a display of Tudor legitimacy, two daughters of Henry VIII, brought together by blood and destiny. Yet beneath the shared triumph ran a quiet tension. Elizabeth Tudor grasped the essence of power intuitively. She recognized that her survival relied on forming an alliance with her sister, at least for the time being. In public, she rejoiced in Mary Tudor's ascent, yet in private, she carefully protected her own status, the second in line to the throne. and a person who would eventually have to maneuver through that same treacherous crown. On the 1st of October, 1553, Mary Tudor was crowned Queen of England in a grand Catholic ceremony, setting the tone for her reign. The ancient belief had made its way back to the center of authority, and the realm would soon experience the complete force of its queen's determination.
From the very beginning, Mary Tudor made it clear that she aimed to eliminate the short-lived experiment with Protestantism and bring England back to the Catholic faith of her upbringing. Although celebrating Mass was still against the law when she ascended to the throne, Mary Tudor diligently worked to reintroduce Catholic rites and practices. Restoring the old religion became the central focus of her government, influencing every policy and diplomatic decision. Obedience to Rome was now anticipated, and those who opposed it faced the threat of punishment.
Mary Tudor held the belief that securing a lasting Catholic succession required a husband and an heir. Despite considerable domestic anxiety, she chose Philip of Spain, heir to the Habsburg domains. They were married on the 25th of July in the year 1554, having met only days prior. This union was driven by dynastic logic rather than romance, as Mary Tudor faced an impossible choice. Marrying an English subject would elevate him above the nobility, while marrying a foreign prince risked foreign influence. Ultimately, the alliance with Spain appeared to be the most sensible path to restore the old faith and strengthen her claim.
On paper, the marriage between Mary Tudor and Philip of Spain represented a powerful alliance, a union that connected England with one of Europe's strongest Catholic dynasties. Philip of Spain himself was no inadequate match, and the agreement arranged for the union included stringent safeguards for England. It ensured that Philip of Spain could hold very little direct power. He could not change the language of government, appoint ministers without consent, remove Mary Tudor from England, or draw the nation into his wars. It was, in contemporary language, a thoughtful political arrangement aimed at protecting England's autonomy.
Yet fear spread quickly among the English populace and nobility. A great number of people thought that after her marriage, Mary Tudor's foreign spouse would overshadow her authority and transform England into a Spanish territory governed by Habsburg influence. The concept of a Catholic nation tied to a foreign empire filled with dread even those who had previously backed her. Mary Tudor never fully understood how deeply this fear permeated her kingdom, or how much her subjects opposed the idea of being ruled by outsiders.
That fear soon burst forth into open rebellion. A band of resolute Protestants, guided by Sir Thomas Wyatt, conspired to topple Mary Tudor and elevate Elizabeth Tudor to the throne in her stead. Wyatt gathered a couple of thousand to 3,000 followers eager to march in the name of Elizabeth Tudor, but the uprising stumbled. Support from the outside never arrived, and apart from Wyatt's small group, very few were ready to take up arms. The uprising that could have altered the course of England's history started to fall apart before it even had the chance to truly commence. The uprising, led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, was quickly subdued. His forces were unable to break through to London and faced defeat at the hands of the Queen's army. The captured ringleaders faced public execution, their deaths presented as a stark warning of Mary Tudor's authority and the hopelessness of defiance. The uprising had caused minimal actual harm to Mary Tudor's reign, but for Elizabeth Tudor, its failure turned into a significantly more perilous issue.
A great number of individuals within the court held the belief that Elizabeth Tudor was aware of the rebellion, or at the very least, felt some sympathy towards it. A number of the conspirators were linked to her household, and whispers circulated that she had known about the plot's intentions. Regardless of its truth, Elizabeth Tudor found her position becoming increasingly precarious. As the symbolic leader of Protestant hope, she stood as a persistent challenge to Mary Tudor's Catholic reign.
You question my judgment at your peril.
Elizabeth Tudor faced numerous interrogations by the Privy Council, steadfastly denying all accusations with a composed determination. Nevertheless, she was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, confined in the same apartments once occupied by her mother, Anne Boleyn, before her execution. It was said that only a stroke of fortune kept Elizabeth Tudor from sharing her mother's fate. Mary Tudor's advisors even prepared an execution warrant, and she reportedly hesitated, with pen in hand, before setting it aside. Whether touched by Elizabeth Tudor's letter asking for mercy or just reluctant to exacerbate the nation's divisions, Mary Tudor decided to spare her sister. Elizabeth Tudor spent a number of months in imprisonment before she was quietly set free.
By the end of the year 1554, Mary Tudor's religious program was firmly established. England had been formally reconciled with Rome, the Catholic doctrine restored, monastic orders revived, and the old laws against heresy reinstated. Throughout the following years, countless Protestants faced condemnation and were burned as heretics, actions that would lead to Mary Tudor being forever known as Bloody Mary. However, during her reign, she did not perceive herself as cruel. For Mary Tudor, the act of purging heresy was not an act of vengeance, but rather a sacred duty, a vital measure to protect her kingdom and the souls of her people from eternal damnation. In the closing months of 1554, Mary Tudor announced that she was expecting a child. The news brought joy to her Catholic supporters and fear to England's Protestants, as a royal heir would ensure a Catholic future for generations ahead. As the months went by, Mary Tudor called upon Elizabeth Tudor to come to court so that she could witness the arrival of the long-anticipated child. A child who would displace Elizabeth Tudor from the line of succession and solidify England's reconnection with Rome.
Throughout the kingdom and across Europe, excitement began to build. Yet the pregnancy that held the hope of reviving the Tudor legacy quickly turned out to be nothing more than a mirage. The months stretched endlessly, with no labor in sight, and at last, Mary Tudor had to step out from her confinement and face the reality. There was no child. The whole realm had waited for a birth that would never come to pass. The false pregnancy brought great humiliation to Mary Tudor and left her utterly devastated. After enduring years of illness and disappointment, she found herself confronted once again by murmurs regarding her frailty. Historians now believe that Mary Tudor may have suffered from ovarian cancer, which was the cause of the swelling that had been mistaken for pregnancy. Whatever the reason, that moment broke her confidence and her sense of authority. For Elizabeth Tudor, the failure brought a sense of quiet relief. She found herself once more next in line for the throne, and her political star began to rise again.
The phantom pregnancy crushed Mary Tudor's dreams, and it also extinguished the faint love that lingered in her marriage. Philip of Spain, having lingered in England long enough to see the truth exposed, departed in September 1555 to attend to matters in the Habsburg Empire. He came back for just a short time, several months before the passing of Mary Tudor. To everyone except Mary Tudor herself, it was evident that the marriage had come to an end. She cherished Philip of Spain with a sort of fervent devotion, yet he viewed her with apathy. When the promised child never arrived, his frustration shifted to embarrassment, and he left her behind to go back to Spain and his fleet. For Mary Tudor, it was a humiliation stacked upon heartbreak.
Her personal loss was soon made worse by political disappointment. The England that Mary Tudor had laboured tirelessly to restore to Rome's embrace now found itself adrift once again. The ongoing wars in Italy had placed Philip of Spain, her husband, in opposition to Pope Paul IV, which made England's position within Catholic Europe more precarious than ever. The alliance that was intended to bolster her reign ultimately left her feeling alone. As Mary Tudor neared the age of 40, she found herself without children, in solitude, and growing more fragile. Her health, which had never been robust, started to decline swiftly. She frequently found herself confined to her chambers, unable to govern with the vigor she once possessed. Her judgment weakened along with her body, and those around her began shifting their loyalties towards Elizabeth Tudor, who now appeared destined to inherit the crown. The Queen, who had battled to reclaim her faith, was diminishing, and with her, the final hope of a steadfastly Catholic England.
As Mary Tudor's health and authority waned, so too did her capacity to govern with equilibrium. She found it difficult to accept differing opinions, unable to navigate through groups or pit competitors against each other as her father had done in the past. Her illness made her seem weak to her people, and in Tudor England, a sickly monarch was often viewed as a bad omen, a sign of divine displeasure. As whispers of her failing health spread, courtiers began quietly shifting their allegiance to Elizabeth Tudor, the rising star at Hatfield. Mary Tudor could feel it unfolding. She noticed loyalty drifting away towards her sister, the emblem of a fresh start. In November 1558, just 5 years after her triumphant coronation, Mary Tudor passed away at the age of 42. The transition that followed was the smoothest that England had experienced in many generations. Elizabeth Tudor, well prepared with her trusted advisor Robert Cecil by her side, stepped into power without any bloodshed. She turned down the marriage proposals from Philip of Spain, who was her late sister's widower, and shortly thereafter directed England's might against Spain, triumphing over the formidable Armada.
The reign of Elizabeth Tudor marked a pivotal period in English history, an era characterized by stability, confidence, and creativity. Under her guidance, England saw a transformation in culture, communication, and ideas. It was the era of poets and playwrights such as Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and John Donne, a golden age of art and intellect. Elizabeth Tudor never married, turning what many perceived as a weakness into a powerful symbol of independence. As the Virgin Queen, she represented a novel form of authority, a sovereign who was not tied to any one man, but to her kingdom.
When you observe how Elizabeth Tudor governed with complete authority and a firm hold on power, it becomes evident that she was destined for the throne. She mastered the art of image, crafting a radiant, commanding presence that outshone all who had come before her. Yet history's tendency to draw a sharp line between Elizabeth Tudor and Mary Tudor overlooks how much the younger sister inherited from the elder sister. A great deal of the practical foundations of Elizabeth Tudor's success, reforms in finance, the strengthening of the navy, and the early encouragement of exploration, were first set in motion by Mary Tudor. Mary Tudor held a profound interest in overseas ventures, championing trade with Russia and the Baltic, while also backing exploration efforts towards the Americas and the Northwest Passage. Elizabeth Tudor would later build on those ambitions, transforming England into a maritime power and establishing the foundation for an empire. Even though their beliefs set them apart, their accomplishments were more closely linked than many recall. Elizabeth Tudor never married and had no heir, and with her passing, the Tudor dynasty, established by Henry VII, came to a close. The crown passed peacefully to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became the first Stuart King of England. In a final act of unity, James VI made sure that the two sisters, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, were laid to rest together.
In death, as in life, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor mirrored the challenges and victories of their time. Daughters once overlooked by their father, rivals separated by belief, and yet both destined to demonstrate that women could govern a kingdom as fiercely and effectively as any king who came before them.
It was Mary Tudor who first articulated the concept of female sovereignty, portraying the monarch as the mother of her nation, a vision that would later be celebrated during Elizabeth Tudor's reign, but originated in Mary Tudor's struggle. Although she was not always held in high regard, Mary Tudor undertook the difficult and vital task of demonstrating that a woman could don the crown without calamity. Throughout her reign, Mary Tudor put in place laws that affirmed a reigning queen held the same authority and legal power as any king. This precedent enabled Elizabeth Tudor to rule with complete legitimacy, resting on the groundwork her sister had established. Together, the two women redefined monarchy itself, showing that intelligence, strategy, and political instinct were not solely the domain of men.
Without Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, the remarkable queens who followed from Victoria to Elizabeth II might not have found acceptance as easily. What started as scandal and uncertainty in the 16th century evolved into tradition and reverence in the years that came after.
In this present day, when a queen on the British throne seems just like anyone else, it is simple to overlook that the idea of a woman reigning was once a groundbreaking concept. Its roots reach back nearly 500 years to two sisters, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, whose rivalry, resilience, and reigns forever changed what it meant to be a woman in power.